Good morning, and thank you for joining UCI Mind Live today. During this crazy, difficult time, I hope that you're all staying healthy and safe, and appreciate you taking the time to join us to learn more about brain health and Alzheimer's disease research. I'm Chelsea Cox. I'm the Associate Director of Education for UCI Mind, which is a National Institutes of Health designated Alzheimer's disease research center at UCI. And we're comprised of over 100 faculty, staff, and trainees at UC Irvine who've really dedicated their lives to solving Alzheimer's disease. And as you may know, Alzheimer's disease is a fatal brain disorder that now affects nearly 6 million Americans and impacts over 16 million unpaid family and friend caregivers. And this episode is a part of a monthly live Q&A series that we do at UCI Mind, where live viewers have the opportunity to ask questions of our nation's leading experts in Alzheimer's and related dementia research. And today, joining me on the topic of exercise and brain health is UCI Mind project scientist, Dr. Nicole Berchtold. So I'm going to add her here to the stream. Welcome, Dr. Berchtold, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation to participate.
Great. Now, before we get started, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Berchtold to all of you. She studied biology at Duke University, and then she spent 2 years conducting neuroscience research at University of Lausanne in Switzerland. She completed her PhD and her postdoctoral training at UC Irvine, and she has since published over 40 peer-reviewed articles investigating how exercise enhances learning and brain function, and the changes that occur in the brain with aging and Alzheimer's disease. Her research and her cutting-edge work has helped secure multiple grants for over 25 years, and she regularly participates in neuroscience conferences and journal reviews to share her expertise with researchers worldwide. So again, Dr. Berchtold, it's an honor to have you here today to discuss the impact of exercise on our brain health and on Alzheimer's disease. And for those of you who are attending live right now, you can participate in this Q&A session by typing your questions for Dr. Berchtold into the comments box that accompanies the video right here. But please do note that whatever you post will be linked to your name and visible to others, so post responsibly. And if you could please try to keep your questions more general rather than personal, that would be much appreciated. So to get us started, Dr. Berchtold, I was hoping that you could just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in studying the link between exercise and the brain and the type of research that you do in your laboratory at UCI Mind.
Sure, yeah. So I started studying the link between exercise and the brain in the mid-1990s as a graduate student in Karl Kottmann's lab. And at that time, well, there was, a general appreciation that exercise was linked to brain function, seemed to improve the brain's working. Very few people are actually studying the biology linking exercise and the brain. So that actually all changed one day in the mid-1990s when Dr. Kottmann had the crazy idea to see if exercise could regulate levels of certain molecules that are called growth factors. And in particular, he was interested in growth factors that are important for neuron health. And these types of growth factors are called neurotrophic factors. At the time, there was another graduate student in the lab named Shani Nieper, and she was the first one to be assigned to the project. So she put some rats in running wheels and let them run for several days, and then looked at what happened in the brain. And so what she found was really exciting and really helped launch the brain exercise research field to the forefront. So she discovered that exercise does increase neurotrophin levels in the brain. And not only that the biggest changes are in brain regions like the hippocampus and cortex that are critical for higher cognitive function. So fortunately for me, Shani decided to leave research at this point. So I was then assigned to the project, and I've been studying how exercise affects the brain ever since. Let's see. So how do we study the link between exercise and the brain? One way that we do this is using animal models of exercise. For example, mice and rats, and they just love to run. They'll actually run like several kilometers, 10 kilometers every night just for fun. So it's really quite impressive. After they've run for several days or weeks, we can ask a whole bunch of questions at multiple levels. So, for example, we can look at how well do the animals learn a new task? Do they learn faster than non-exercised animals, or do they form stronger memories? Are these cognitive benefits affected by the duration or frequency that the animals exercise? Do the animals do the benefits occur in both young and aged animals? And does exercise slow aging-related changes in the brain? Also very important for this series, we're interested in whether exercise can offset Alzheimer's disease and reduce the accumulation of brain pathology. And we also look at other biological mechanisms to try to understand how exercise is supporting cognitive benefits. And so this involves looking at, are there more synaptic connections? Are there changes to genes or molecules and signaling systems that support learning and memory? So as you can see, there's a lot of questions that we can ask.
Yeah, it sounds like your lab is very active in doing lots of different interesting studies, which kind of leads to my next question. I was just wondering, from your perspective, what have been your labs, or would you say the field's most important findings related to exercise and brain function?
Oh, wow. There's just so many exciting findings from the last 25 years. Well, I'd say that one of the first findings that was really pivotal for the field, as I mentioned, was that early discovery by Carl Kottmann's lab that exercise increases neurotrophic factors. And for me, especially, that exercise increased levels of my favorite growth factor, which is called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about BDNF and why it's so exciting that exercise increases BDNF, because BDNF is like fertilizer for the brain. It helps neurons be healthier and more resilient to injury. And even more exciting is that we now know that BDNF is really a critical molecule for learning and memory function. So this is really interesting, is exercise is increasing BDNF availability in the hippocampus, which is a brain region that's critical for learning, memory, and also a region that's affected early in Alzheimer's disease. So here you have this key learning molecule that is being increased exactly where you need it most in the brain to enhance health and cognitive function. We discovered that BDNF is actually quite critical, because if you prevent exercise from increasing BDNF in the hippocampus, you actually prevent the cognitive benefits of exercise. So the BDNF discoveries really launched interest in the exercise brain field, and many more researchers started to investigate this area. So at the behavioral level, one very exciting finding is that we found that exercise allows animals to learn much faster than non-exercised animals, and that they can even learn tasks that sedentary animals simply cannot learn. Now, a question that we get asked a lot is, how much exercise do I have to do, really? So what people are asking here is not how much exercise do I have to do, but really, how little exercise do I have to do to get the cognitive benefits? So
we have a question from a viewer on that topic. One of our viewers asked, what intensity level are we talking about? So if you could maybe speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, well, the benefits of exercise are kind of dose dependent and intensity dependent. So even if you do any exercise at all is better than nothing. I want to start with that. But the more exercise you do and the more intense the exercise is, the greater the benefits will be. Okay. So, you can do a brisk walk, you can run, you can play tennis, you can just take the stairs, you can lift some weights. Just anything that gets your heart rate going and sweating a little bit is going to be having benefits. And then try to do it frequently, every day if possible, several times a week. All of that's going to help.
What would you say is your exercise of choice?
Well, my exercise of choice, I like to be varied. Right now I do a lot of walking and running in the hilly areas of Laguna Beach. So that definitely gets my heart rate up and sweaty. But I also like to swim in the ocean and go surfing, skiing, sometimes just walking. Pretty much, I just like to shake it up.
Yeah. So there's lots of different exercises people can engage in, but probably best to work with your doctor to decide what type of exercise is best for you, and all of those things you mentioned, surfing and walking and things sound really fun. I wish I could. It looks like we have another question here from a viewer. When you say exercise, Dr. Berchtold, do you only mean cardiac, or do you mean strength training too?
Most of the studies have been looking at aerobic exercise, but strength training is very important as well. One really exciting finding that's recently come out, or has been coming out in the last decade or so, is that when you exercise, as you know, it stimulates not just your brain, but also your body. And it stimulates your many organs in your body, like your muscles and your liver and your circulatory system. It stimulates them to release molecules into the bloodstream. And then these molecules cross the blood-brain barrier, they go into the brain, and they cause change, beneficial change in the brain. So there's really this general connection, overall connection between the body and the brain. And you're going to get benefits. If you're strength training, it's definitely stimulating your muscles to release those molecules. And if you're doing aerobic, it's also stimulating your muscles and perhaps your liver a bit more, because it's breaking down molecules for energy. So I guess the long and short of it is just exercise, do it all, whatever you can, whatever your body lets you.
Okay. And then another question here. If you stop exercising for a time, do you lose the cognitive benefit altogether? Great question.
That's such an interesting question, and one that I've been interested in for quite a while. And it's true that since most people don't exercise every day, or they go through phases where they don't exercise at all, this is important. So I looked at how frequently we need to exercise and how long we can stay sedentary before the brain loses the benefits of exercise. And the good news is that, at least in mice, exercising every other day is as good as daily exercise. And also, we found that the increase in BDNF and the cognitive benefits, they're sustained for quite some time after exercise stops. And then, even, this is very interesting, once you start exercising again, the benefits actually come back much more rapidly. So this has led us to the idea there's sort of a memory in the brain for exercise, like a memory at the molecular level. So, the brain stays primed to respond more quickly to the next time that you exercise. And so that's really great news for all of us who take several days off from exercise.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, that kind of, you talk about the work that you do with animal models in the laboratory and BDNF and all the important benefits that it has on our brain. How does this translate to humans? So, we have a question here: can exercise actually slow the progression of MCI or Alzheimer's disease? So how do these studies that you're doing in the laboratories, how do we take that and then translate that and answer questions about humans in regard to Alzheimer's and MCI?
Yeah, so well, one approach that we have taken is trying to understand if the biology of what we're seeing in the animal models of exercise is if this is also seen in human brains. And so in a study that we published recently, we looked at two groups of people, those who generally were very active, and then another group who was rather sedentary. And I looked at the patterns of gene expression in their brains, and I found that the the patterns are very different in people who have exercised, in that the molecules, the genes that are coding for molecules that are important for synaptic function and synaptic plasticity, those are the fundamentals for learning. I found that the genes that are regulating the synapses and their strength are greatly increased broadly over many, many different types of these molecules. They're increased in the people's brains who have exercised. And also genes that are related to energy production are increased. So this means that if you exercise, just like the animals, in the human brain, we have the mechanisms there in place to have stronger synapses and the mechanisms to provide the energy that the cells need to establish those changes. So outside of our lab, there's been much research, showing in human studies that exercise improves learning and memory, that it slows aging of the brain, and that it can delay Alzheimer's disease. And exercise also helps the brain heal from injuries like stroke. And in people who exercise, their brains have more gray matter and also more white matter, which is the connections between the neurons. And they have less brain cell loss as they age. Now there's a study called EXERT trial, which has been ongoing for about 2 years now, and it's a really exciting clinical trial that was designed by Carl Koppmann at UCI and Laura Baker at Wake Forest, and it's a phase 3 randomized controlled trial that involves 300 people, and it will test whether aerobic training can improve memory and thinking skills and brain health. So it's going to take place using people that have mild memory loss. So these are people at high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And the trial is 18 months long, and the participants go to their local YMCA 3 times a week and work with a trainer to do aerobic training. So I think this is going to be very exciting, the findings of this, to understand if exercise can not just slow the aging process, but how effective it is when disease or degeneration is already set in, and whether it's effective to slow those declines.
Yeah, so that was a really great question from a viewer, in that the EXERT clinical trial that's being conducted at UCI, and again, as Dr. Berchtold mentioned, being led by Dr. Carl Koppmann, UCI MIND's founding director, is really aiming to answer that exact question of whether we can say for certain that exercise can actually slow progression of MCI to Alzheimer's or to dementia. So looks like we have another question here from a viewer. The notion of exercise in relation to animals. They only know movement as a mode of survival unless their environments are restricted. So could you please explain this use of imposing exercise on lab animals? Has there been any critique of this notion of animals exercising?
Well, what we do is actually not imposing exercise on the animals, because we're interested in involuntary exercise, and we don't want to force an animal to exercise because, as we know, if someone forces you to exercise and you don't want to, it's stressful. And stress is not good for the brain. So we're interested in voluntary exercise. And this is why we put the running wheels in the animal cages. And this lets the animals run as much or as little as they want. And so this really kind of models what people do. Some people like to exercise a lot. Some people, don't like to do very much exercise. So we feel that the animal model of exercise is quite appropriate. And, this is really funny, because we would think that the animals only would run in nature for survival or looking for food. But some researchers have put running wheels, out in like forests or different areas, and had little spy cameras to see what animals were doing. And actually, mice and rats would jump into those running wheels out in the wild, and just start running around and run and run and run. So I think they actually find it inherently rewarding to run in the wheel. For some reason, it's fun.
Thanks for answering that. We have a couple more questions coming in from our viewers. Thanks everybody for asking all these great questions. One is about sex differences. Do men and women respond to exercise differently?
That's an excellent question, and I don't think we have the answer to that yet. There have been a few studies that have looked exclusively at women and found very strong relationships between exercise and brain health in women. But I don't believe that there's been any large enough studies that we could look to see if there's strong differences in how men and women's brains respond to exercise. But yeah, very interesting question. Yeah,
that'd be an interesting area of study. Another question here is physical stimulation more valuable than mental stimulation?
Oh, well, they are two birds of a feather. They just go hand in hand. It's not that one is more important than the other. If you just have physical stimulation and no mental stimulation, you're basically, physical stimulation is setting up your brain system to learn. It's putting all the molecules in place to allow you to learn and to learn faster. But if you're not stimulating your brain, if you're not trying to learn something, you're not going to learn anything, even if you have all the molecules in place. So you have to do both. You really have to do both. And the two approaches are going to affect different systems in your brain and have different mechanisms so that they're complementary.
And this is kind of related to another question that I was going to ask you. So to follow up on that, aside from exercise and mental stimulation, what are some other things that we can do to keep our brains healthy as we age?
Oh, there's many aspects of our lifestyle that will keep us healthy, keep our brains healthy as we age. And a lot of it is common sense, or just what your mom told you when you were growing up. So the main things to do are, to maintain a healthy diet, especially with fish, fruit, and vegetables, moderate alcohol intake, definitely not smoking, and generally keeping your brain challenged by trying to learn new things. So you can think about it, essentially the brain, it's like a muscle. If you don't exercise your muscles, they're going to atrophy. And same thing for your brain. It's not going to waste energy maintaining synapses that you never use.
Yeah, okay. Another question here is whether there have been any studies that show how much exercise is too much. Is that...
That is also a very important question. It's a tricky one to study. If you can look at it in animals, you can see that if they are forced to exercise, so they exercise too much, that it's a stressful event, and that the benefits then from exercise are really attenuated. And in people, this is not really well defined. And part of the problem is that what one person defines as strenuous or too much exercise is certainly not what another person defines as that. So, I'm not going to go run a marathon because, I think I would probably drop dead. But so that would be very stressful for me, too much exercise. And I think that would actually be harmful for my brain. But for some reason, for some people, marathons and these crazy runs, they are, that's just something that they do and they enjoy it. So I think a good metric is if your body is enjoying it and you're feeling good afterwards, that's a good index of what is a good amount of exercise for yourself. But yeah, very interesting question. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so listening to your body, it sounds like, and definitely checking in with your doctor or physician regularly to make sure you're doing what's best for you, for your health. Dr. Berchtold, I just kind of we have a few more minutes in, and wanted to end on what projects you're currently working on in your lab and what your future goals are for studying the links between exercise and brain health.
So I'm working on, basically understanding the molecular memory for exercise that I had mentioned. What is the reason or the mechanisms for how exercise, our brain can have a memory for exercise, and that the biology can respond faster to exercise bouts once you've already had experience with exercise? And we're looking at that from at the epigenetic level and seeing if maybe there's changes to the actual DNA that allows the genes to be accessed more quickly by the transcription machinery. That might be a little bit too technical. But so basically looking more into the molecular mechanisms of how exercise benefits are preserved. And I'm also very interested in defining how the human brain changes with normal aging, and what we can do to counteract these changes to maintain cognitive function despite aging.
Well, thanks for sharing your expertise with us today and for taking time to answer our questions. It sounds like you're doing some really exciting, important work. And we got another question in here that I just want to address really quickly, of whether you know that of any studies investigating exercise and brain health specifically for people over 50.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much all of these, pretty much the biggest benefits that we're seeing in these studies are in older individuals. So pretty much the studies, when we say aging, it's over 60, over 65, 70. And clearly the EXERT trial is one that's currently ongoing, looking at older individuals that have the mild cognitive impairments. And those are going to be individuals that are older than 65. So actually the aging brain and the aging field is one of the hot areas of research for exercise.
Yeah, and for any community member or anybody 18 and older who's interested in learning about research studies or ways that they can participate in future studies at UCI, you can visit the UCI Consent to Contact Registry website, which I'll flash on the screen here. So that's c2c.uci.edu. And that's where any community member 18 and older can go and fill out some information about themselves online, including their exercise history, the way that they eat, how they sleep, and then they could potentially be matched with studies that they might qualify for at UCI in the future. So that's a good way to stay abreast of the things that we're doing and the studies that are ongoing at UCI. And then I want to just kind of end by thanking everybody who attended live today. There were some really great questions on this important topic of exercise and our brain health. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a part of a monthly live Q&A series. So if you want to join us next month, we're going to be gathering again on August 21st. And our next episode is going to be about the link between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. And I will be joined by guest expert Eric Duran, who manages the Down syndrome research program at UCI. So it should be a really interesting and rich discussion about that important link. In the meantime, to read daily updates about Alzheimer's disease research at UCI MIND and around the world, and to learn about local COVID-19 resources for older adults, which we're trying to communicate to our community and our followers, you can visit our blog at mind.uci.edu/blog. We try to update that daily and provide valuable information for all of the people who follow us. And with that, Dr. Berchtold, just want to thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you next month. So take care.
All right. Thank you very much for including me in this. This is very fun.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.